As Ukraine and Russia slug it out in eastern Ukraine, one has to ask, is there an endgame to this slaughter? Hi folks, and welcome back to the Storm and Cellar. The madness continues in the Ukraine-Russian war. As some say, the Ukrainian offensive is more like the US moving through the French hedgerows following D-Day, but to me, this war is still reminiscent of the brutal trench warfare during World War I. As I walked Flanders fields and sat in some of the remaining trenches, I can imagine what was going on in Ukraine. I laid a wreath at the Flanders American Cemetery, which made the whole thing that much more vivid to me. This was supposed to be the Ukrainian crescendo with a massive spring offensive that was supposed to turn the tide on the Russians. Instead, it's become a stalemate with Ukrainian and Russian troops daily trading yards back and forth all summer long. Both sides have relegated the battles to mostly machine guns and a few specialty small arms weapons. As the Ukrainians receive more sophisticated equipment from the West, I see two things that's important here. One, are some of these systems just too complicated for the Ukrainians, especially without extensive training? I mean, it took Ukrainians 5 days to find the air conditioning in the new MRAP vehicles the US gave them. Two, with the war pretty much being fought in trench warfare, how effective will the US and Western tanks actually be in this environment on the battlefield? Billions of US dollars have been thrown at the war without any endgame. If it has, I sure haven't heard it from the US administration or the Pentagon. All they seem to say is, send billions more and we'll see who the last man standing might be. After all, thousands and thousands of troops on both sides have been killed and wounded, and there's no end in sight. As we look at the Vietnam War and more recently the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, we can possibly see a continuation of the same thing which is happening in Ukraine. First come the money and weapons transfer, then advisors, then a massive increase of troops. Look, I'd bet a paycheck there's no doubt in my mind that there's already US and possibly NATO advisors already in Ukraine. The difference is we're now dealing with a nuclear power in the equation, not Afghanistan, not Iraq, and not North Vietnam. If the possibility of escalation wasn't bad enough, this war has not only increased the possibility of World War III, but it has isolated Russia right into the arms of the People's Republic of China, North Korea, and Iran. I think we know this has become a political hot potato in the US, possibly even in the EU, but as with the invasion on the US southern border, which shows no end in sight, billions continue to be paid to protect Ukraine's border, which makes no sense to me. And then there's the news media. Are we sure the war is being reported accurately? I mean, who's winning, if anyone? The Russians have supposedly turned on the wartime manufacturing and have outgunned the Ukrainians, and yet it's still a stalemate. The Ukrainians thought the war would be nearly won by now with their big spring offensive, but they're about to head back into a winter battle with the Russians. I believe we're hearing what the powers to be want us to hear. Fortunately, I also believe the American people are starting to see the truth, that this thing is out of control. So what is the truth? First, this is not a popular war in the US and probably not in Europe. Second, this is not a NATO problem, it's an EU problem. Third, this war is going to rock on until a tripwire causes a problem that absolutely no one wants, or Ukraine makes concessions with Russia, or the Russian people grow tired of the body count. A little over 5 million people have left Ukraine since the war started, and 1.4 million left for Russia, which tells me that all Ukrainians aren't all in for the war. We also know that Poland, although transferred many weapon systems to Ukraine, will no longer be contributing due to their own military buildup. Perhaps the smart thing would be for all EU countries to do the same thing. We also know that according to the CPI, Russia and Ukraine are two of the most corrupt countries in Europe. So we have to ask, considering there is no end state to the war in Ukraine, is supporting the war any further a smart foreign policy decision? What do you all think? Are we past the point of no return in support of Ukraine, or should the US and EU cut bait and run? Let me know what you guys think by leaving your comments down below. Hey, if you like the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and share with your friends and enemies. Helps the channel grow. So until next time, make sure all your takeoff and landings equal.